It's 11 at night, and you're on a retirement calculator again. Age, current savings, expected return. You hit enter, and the screen gives you a number. 2.4 million, 1.8 million. Whatever it is, that number becomes the finish line of your entire financial life. Every dollar you save gets measured against the distance still left to travel. Here is the contradiction nobody explains to you. Financial planners watch thousands of clients hit that exact number and keep working anyway. Not because they suddenly need more, because the number was never actually a measure of freedom. It was a withdrawal rate formula built to solve a narrow actuarial problem, sold back to you as the meaning of your working life. I'm going to show you where that number came from, who profits from you chasing it long after it stops helping you, and what two people with the same income did differently once they stopped treating it as the goal. The belief feels earned, not naive. You were told, correctly, that discipline compounds. Save early. Increase your contribution rate with every raise. Let the market do the multiplying. Somewhere along the way, you were also handed a target, a single dollar figure that would tell you when the discipline paid and the working part of your life was allowed to end. That target organizes everything downstream of it. Whether you're on track or behind, it tells you how much risk to carry in your portfolio and how many more years of income you need to extract from your career before the number arrives. It turns retirement into a finish line you can see from very far away, which is comforting in its own way because a finish line implies an end. Hit the number, and the working years stop being an open-ended sentence. They become a countdown with a fixed length, defined by math you didn't write but trust because it came from people whose job title includes the word advisor. The number feels like an opinion and more like a physical property of your finances, as fixed as your account balance itself. The reinforcement is constant and mostly invisible. Every workplace retirement dashboard scores you against the same benchmark, on track or behind, green or amber, using someone else's assumptions about your future spending and someone else's assumed retirement age. Every year, the balance moves closer to the target. The feeling of progress is real. What rarely gets questioned is whether the target itself was the right thing to measure progress against in the first place. Most people never ask who decided what the number should represent, because the number arrives prepackaged, presented as neutral math rather than as one interpretation among several. Here is the crack. In early retirement communities, the pattern of reaching the calculated number and not stopping has a name: one more year syndrome. It's been documented and discussed for over a decade, common enough that it has its own shorthand. People hit the exact balance their formula said would be enough, and instead of stopping, they recalculate. Often, they don't just add a year, they quietly lower the assumed withdrawal rate from 4% to 3.5%, sometimes to 3%, each downward revision requiring a larger portfolio and another year or two of income to reach it. The finish line doesn't just fail to arrive, it moves. If the number really measured what it claims to measure, this shouldn't happen. A finish line that recedes every time you approach it isn't a finish line. It's something else wearing a finish line's clothing. The standard explanation is psychological: fear of running out, loss aversion, identity tied to a career. All of that is real, and none of it is the full story, because the pattern shows up even among people who report no fear and no attachment to their job title. What they share instead is the same calculation method. The same formula that told them how much to save also quietly defined what enough would feel like when they got there. And for a formula built around a lump sum instead of a lived outcome, enough was never actually the target. It was a moving reference point disguised as a fixed one. There's a second detail that rarely gets mentioned. The person who builds your retirement projection is, in the large majority of cases, compensated as a percentage of the very number you're trying to reach. The incentive to help you stop accumulating and the paycheck for helping you accumulate more sit in direct tension, and only one of them shows up on the invoice. The mechanism has a name. Call it the accumulation target design. It's the reason your retirement goal is expressed as a single lump sum rather than as a monthly amount of coverage, And that single design choice determines almost everything about how long you keep working. The origin is specific and traceable. In 1994, a financial planner named William Bengen published research on how much a retiree could safely withdraw from a stock and bond portfolio each year without running out of money. He called it the Safamax rate. 4 years later, 3 professors at Trinity University ran a similar analysis using historical market data and arrived at a comparable figure, an initial withdrawal rate of figure, adjusted upward with inflation each year, that held up in the large majority of 30-year periods they tested. That paper became known as the Trinity study, and the 4% rule was born from it. Flip 4% upside down, and you get 25. If 4% of your savings should cover 1 year of spending, then your savings need to be 25 times thus your annual spending before you're considered safe to stop. That's the entire origin of the number staring back at you on the calculator. A withdrawal rate study designed to answer one narrow question: how much can a 30-year retirement portfolio safely pay out, got inverted into a savings target and then marketed as the definition of financial freedom itself. The early internet-era financial independence movement of the 2000s and 2010s took the 25 times formula and turned it into a cultural finish line, complete with countdown spreadsheets and a specific age attached to a specific balance. Nothing about that history is wrong on its own terms. The math holds up reasonably well as a withdrawal rate estimate. The distortion happens at the translation step, when a rate designed to answer, "How much can I safely spend from a portfolio I already have?" gets repurposed to answer a completely different question. How much do I need before my working life is allowed to change? Those are not the same question, and the formula was never built to answer the second one. Here's who benefits from the translation staying in place. The dominant fee model in financial advising charges a percentage of the assets under management, typically around 1% a year, sometimes ranging from 0.5% to just over 1.5%, according to industry fee surveys published this year. That means an advisor's revenue is directly proportional to your account balance, not to your progress toward anything you'd actually recognize as freedom. A client with $3 million generates roughly 3 times the fee revenue of a client with $1 million, regardless of whether either client has already reached the point where their essential costs are fully covered by guaranteed income. The incentive structure has no mechanism for telling you that you have enough, because enough is the one outcome that stops the fee from growing. Robo-advisors and target date retirement funds inherited the same framing at a lower price point. Even at fee levels closer to 1/4 or 0.5% instead of a full percent, their revenue still scales with the size of your balance, not with how much of your essential spending is already secured. Their dashboards, their glide paths, their progress bars, all of it measures success in total dollars accumulated against a lump sum target because that's the only output the underlying formula was built to produce. The entire consumer-facing infrastructure of retirement planning, expensive advisors and cheap and automated ones alike, converges on the same accumulation target design, not because it's the only valid way to plan, but because it's the only version of the plan that keeps generating revenue for the party managing your money after you've already reached the point of having enough. The second-order effect shows up inside the workplace plan itself. Employer-sponsored 401k platforms present the same on-track or behind messaging using the same lump sum logic, which means the reinforcement doesn't require you to hire anyone at all. The framing arrives by default, embedded in the software your employer selected on your behalf, long before you're old enough to question whether the software's definition of enough matches your own. There is a different way to calculate enough, one that measures coverage instead of accumulation. It asks a narrower, more useful question. What is the monthly dollar amount your essential obligations require, and how much of that amount is already produced by income sources that don't depend on you showing up to a job? That number is almost always dramatically smaller than the lump sum target, and its reachable years, sometimes a decade earlier. It rarely shows up on a standard retirement calculator because it isn't the number the industry's fee structure was built around. Two people can start from the same income and the same age and end up in structurally different financial position depending entirely on which of these two numbers they were solving for. The two people in this scenario are composites, built from aggregate financial planning and salary data, not individual case files. Call them Marcus and Priya. Both are 34. Both work in mid-level corporate roles. Marcus in operations, Priya in marketing. Both married with one child, both bringing in a combined household income of $145,000 a year. Both start with the same net worth, $180,000, and the same essential monthly costs, $4,200 covering housing, insurance, food, and childcare. On paper, at 34, they are financially identical. Marcus works with an advisor who builds him the standard plan. Annual spending in retirement, projected at $96,000 times 25, produces a target of $2.4 million. At his current savings rate, the plan puts that date at age 55, 21 years out. Marcus organizes every financial decision around protecting that 21-year timeline, a pattern his advisor's software labels discipline, and Marcus, privately, describes as quiet resentment he stopped mentioning out loud. In year 6 at 40, he's offered a role at a smaller company, lower stress, a 22% pay cut. Work he describes as the kind of job that doesn't follow you home. He runs the numbers and declines. The pay cut would drop his contribution rate enough to push the target date out by roughly 3 years, and the calculator treats that delay as a straightforward loss. He stays in the higher-paying, higher-stress role, still chasing the same lump sum, still 21 years from a finish line he set at 34 and hasn't revisited since. Priya works without an advisor's lump sum framing. Instead of asking how much she needs to accumulate, she calculates how much guaranteed monthly income would fully cover her essential costs. Her number is $4,200 a month, $50,400 a year, roughly $250,000 smaller as a target than Marcus's lump sum, because it was never asking the same question. She builds toward it through a mix of a small rental property generating $1,100 a month net, a bond ladder, and dividend-paying holdings, tracking one figure every quarter. How much of her essential monthly cost is covered by income that doesn't require her to keep working? The emotional state she names, by year 5, is closer to grounded certainty than excitement, a flat and glamorous confidence that has nothing to do with her total balance. In year 8, at 42, that coverage hits 100%. Her essential costs are now paid regardless of what happens to her job. Nothing about Priya's life changes overnight. She doesn't quit. What changes is the shape of every decision that follows. Later that year, she negotiates a 4-day week at a reduced salary in a role closer to the work she finds meaningful, something that would have been financially reckless for Marcus to even propose to himself. The pay cut doesn't threaten her because her floor was never dependent on that paycheck. Marcus, at the same point in year 8, is still 13 years from his number, still declining opportunities that would delay it, still measuring every decision against a target he set before he knew what 42 would feel like. Neither outcome is framed here as a victory. Marcus isn't failing. His portfolio by year 8 is objectively larger than Priya's. But the two of them are solving different equations, and only one of those equations was ever designed to produce optionality before retirement age. The difference wasn't income, and it wasn't discipline. Both saved aggressively. The difference was which number they were told to chase. Marcus and Priya are one comparison. The design decision behind their diverging outcomes isn't. It sits underneath nearly every retirement planning tool in circulation, from full-service advisors to free robo-advisor dashboards to the default projections built into workplace 401k platforms. All of them ask the same question first: what lump sum will you need? Almost none of them ask, as a starting point, what monthly coverage would make your paycheck optional? If you multiplied Marcus's 21-year timeline across every saver using the same default calculator logic, hypothetically, you wouldn't get 21 million individual stories. You'd get a structural pattern. A population of savers whose sense of financial safety is pinned to a number that grows every time the market dips, that resets every time spending assumptions rise, and that rarely gets recalculated around what coverage they've already secured. The lump sum framing doesn't just describe how people plan. It shapes what they're willing to risk along the way, which job offers they decline, which negotiations they don't attempt, which pay cuts stay theoretical, because the countdown clock says they can't afford the delay. The shift from pensions to 401k style accounts decades ago moved the entire burden of defining enough from institutions onto individuals, and individuals inherited the accumulation framing because it was the only framework the financial industry had built out at scale. Pensions used to answer the coverage question directly: a fixed monthly payment for life tied to your final salary. Defined contribution accounts replaced that with a balance, and a balance requires a target, and the target that got standardized was the lump sum, not the monthly figure it was theoretically supposed to produce. The asset management industry didn't design this to be dishonest. The fee structure simply rewards one framing over the other. An advisor paid roughly 1% of assets under management has no structural incentive to tell a client they've already reached sufficiency, because sufficiency is the one milestone that stops the fee from compounding alongside the portfolio. Multiply that single percentage point incentive across an industry managing trillions of dollars in retirement assets, hypothetically, and you get a self-reinforcing default. Every tool, every calculator, every dashboard converges on the version of enough that keeps growing, because that's the version every party downstream of your account balance gets paid to help you casings. None of this requires anyone to be acting in bad faith. Bengen and the Trinity study authors solved a real problem accurately. The distortion isn't in their math. It's in what got built on top of it, an entire consumer-facing planning industry that adopted the one interpretation of enough that happened align with its own revenue model and left the other interpretation, coverage instead of accumulation, absent from the default screen almost everywhere you'd encounter it. Retirement, as most people are handed the term, means a specific age attached to a specific balance, the point at which a formula says you're permitted to stop. That definition was inherited from a withdrawal rate study, never designed to describe a life, only a portfolio's endurance over 30 years. The definition sold alongside it, the 25 times lump sum, measures how much you've accumulated. It has no mechanism for measuring what that accumulation actually buys you along the way, because buying you something along the way was never the question it was built to answer. Priya's number measured something else entirely. Not how much she'd amassed, but how much leverage she was carrying at any given point. Leverage against her own employer, against a bad manager, against a role that no longer fit, because her essential costs were covered independent of any single paycheck. That's a different currency than net worth. Net worth is what a formula tracks. Optionality is what actually changes the conditions of your working life, and it doesn't require the number most calculators are built to produce. This isn't an argument that Marcus's approach failed. His balance sheet, by the numbers, is stronger. It's an argument that the two paths were never actually solving the same problem, despite sharing a name. One measured distance from a lump sum, the other measured distance from needing permission. The industry that built the standard version has no reason to distinguish between them, because only one of the two definitions keeps generating a fee as it grows. The coverage number from the mechanism section earlier, the monthly figure instead of the multiplied one, is the same calculation Priya was running without necessarily naming it that way. It doesn't replace the lump sum target. It sits underneath it, answering a narrower question the larger number was never built to answer. Not how much have you accumulated, but how much of your life is currently required to run only because a paycheck is still required to run it. two people can hold identical net worth and stand in entirely different relationships to that requirement. The goal was never really to retire, not in the sense of a countdown ending at a fixed age. The goal underneath the formula was always to reach the point of not needing to say yes to things you'd otherwise decline. Somewhere in the translation from withdrawal rate research to consumer financial planning, that distinction got flattened into a single number, round, large, and reliably slower to reach than the version that actually would have changed something. The finish line was real. It just never belonged to you. It belonged to whoever got paid every year you kept running toward it, 1% at a time, for as long as you kept running. If your number measured coverage instead of a lump sum, how much smaller would it actually be? And how much sooner would you have already reached it? The retirement goal was designed for a world that no longer exists, and the industry that profits from it has every incentive to keep the goal exactly where it is.